following announcement has been paid for by the Wrestling Epicenter.
Hey, everybody.
Hey, guys.
Hello, ladies. Remember me? Let me talk to you, dummies.
It's now time
It's beer time. TikTok.
It's showtime!
for the longest running wrestling talk show in history.
We are huge. It's gonna be cool.
You're where it's at.
You smell like me.
Tune in each and every week.
You better keep listening, or I'll come out of your computer
And turn it on for you.
or else I'm gonna kick your stinking teeth in.
We've been known by a few names.
The needs of the many far outweigh the needs of the few.
The Interactive Interview,
Interactive interview. Oh, yeah.
Interactive interview.
The interactive interview. Interactive interview. The interactive interview.
Interactive Wrestling Radio,
Interactive wrestling radio.
Interactive Wrestling Radio.
Interactive radio.
Interactive wrestling radio.
Interactive wrestling radio.
The Blaze,
Blaze 1260 AM.
The Blaze.
The Blaze.
Blaze. The Blaze Rock.
and a lot of other names.
Weekend Weird of Wrestling. The Pile Driver.
The Epa Wrestling Center.
3 Count Wrestling. The Hour Slam.
But it's all one show, the Wrestling Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter. The Wrestling Epicenter.
The Epicenter.
Wrestling Epicenter, dude.
The Wrestling Epicenter. Don't get off.
And your host from day one,
By ignorance or arrogance.
James Walsh.
Wake up, sleepyheads.
Dr. Carol S.
It all starts
What a rush. Oh, Boomer Sooner.
Thank you very much.
I got 2 words for you. Thumbs down. Breaking necks and cashing checks. Bang. I've heard a lot about you guys.
Check it out. Get out of my face. You win!
But I'm desperately out of time!
So what you gonna do when Blaze-a-mania runs wild on you?
now.
Hey gang, it's James Walsh here from the Wrestling Epicenter doing a quick introduction on our interview with CW Anderson. Brand new interview. He had joined us in the past. In fact, he joined us as our second or third interview. I want to say third, back in 2002 going into 2003. My first interview was Trinity. My second interview was Larry Zbyszko. So this would have been number 3, and Buff Bagwell was number 4. Now, for those who know our history, Buff and CW never aired because my stupid recorder from Radio Shack started to Swiss cheese it. If I wasn't talking, it decided it didn't need to record, even though I could re-record my stuff, but the guest I couldn't re-record. So it just kept cutting them off about 3 minutes in. So they'd start talking maybe about 30, 40, 50 seconds. I'd get a partial answer, and it just would stop recording because I wasn't talking. So if you ever wondered in the past why in our early interviews I'd go, or huh, or things like that, just make noises, it was because I was a little gun shy that without me talking, my recording equipment was going to stop. Of course, we don't use Radio Shack equipment anymore. Radio Shack isn't a thing. But this is a really good brand new interview with a man who just unretired. So glad he's back in pro wrestling. He is a fantastic performer and a better guy. Every time, and we've had him on a number of times, excluding the one that did not work out. Every time we ask him, he is so polite and ready to do it and wanting to do it. And that's a rarity. Not everybody wants to do interviews, especially in the days of social media where you can get your message out a lot easier than you could before. Really, really a good interview. I hope you guys enjoy it. And this one is to celebrate 20 years since the end of ECW just yesterday. In fact, the day we recorded it was the final show, 20 years to the day in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. Enjoy CW Anderson.
This is the king of old school, Steve Corino, and you're listening to Interactive Interview.
Welcome back to Interactive Wrestling Radio. On the Newsmaker line with us right now is a gentleman who just had a Terry Funk moment. He retired and came back to pro wrestling, and I'm so glad he did. ECW Original CW Anderson. Mr. Anderson, are you with me?
I'm with you. Thank you so much for having me.
It's such a pleasure to have you on. A little true story for you. You were my second interview, and the recorder blew it completely, and I never aired any part of it because it was so Swiss cheesed, and that was in 2002.
Wow.
So here we are, 18 years later, and I'm still doing it, and thankfully so are you. So I appreciate you taking the time to do this.
Sam, thanks so much for having me on, man. I'm excited to be back, so to speak, and looking forward to what's coming.
All right. Well, let's talk a little bit about what I started saying, that you were coming back to pro wrestling. What decided or what made you decide to give it another shot and come back into the squared circle?
Without going into way too much detail, I mean, the ones that know, I was in a very, very dark place over the summer, to the point where you only hear the bad news from another wrestler. And luckily, man, I know some people may believe in God, some may don't. I used to be one of the ones that didn't, thought the Bible and God was a book of myths. But it was like that night, the day I posted that video, it was kind of my own cry for help. And a local preacher reached out to me a few hours later, and it seemed like everything changed after that. And the reason I did it, again, I was in a dark place listening to other people, and I thought this was the thing to do to make others happy. And it at the end of the day, it was supposed to be making me happy. So I realized after a few months that I did make a huge mistake, and I didn't want to be one of these guys. I wanted to walk away from wrestling on my own call, but when I had nothing left to give. And for people that know me and people listening to this interview, this past Thursday, January 7th, I turned 50 years old. And I get called Benjamin Button because it seems like the older I get, the younger I look, because you can look at pictures of me now and look at pictures of me from ECW, which January 7th is the anniversary of my I Quit match. It was my 30th birthday, things like that. So I look better now than what I did then. And I'm in better shape. I move faster, and I wanted to come back. And again, that's why I get called a lot of people saying I'm Terry Funking it. But I think after this one, if I do decide to call it quits, it'll be when I have nothing left, but it will never be in one of those emotional videos, because that video, I collapsed afterwards. It was a bad night. It was really bad, but that's in the past. My life has turned around. My life's been doing nothing but going upward. And when, I was talking to my fiance at the time, my girlfriend, and, she used to be my valet, still will be when we get running again. And she's always had my back. She's always been a supporter of me. She's always like, you do what makes you happy. I'll support you either way. And she knew wrestling made me happy. So I was ready to come back, and I knew with this pandemic that it wasn't going to be like it was before, but still just being back in the ring, man, it's like my home. It's been something I've been doing for 27 years. So
Absolutely. And you mentioned that video, and I don't want to bring you down. I don't want to go over it ad nauseum, but I will tell you this. My wife watched it, and I walked in the room, and she had her tablet in her hand, and she's staring at it, and she had tears in her eyes. And I said, "What happened? Who died?" And she said, "I just watched the damnedest thing." And she showed me what it was, and it was that video of you announcing your retirement. So you touched people, and she's not, by the way, she's not like me. She's from England. She was not necessarily, an ECW hardcore fan. But you touched people with that video, so that was really real, and I'm glad the preacher reached out to you and helped you get back on track, because that's incredible.
Yeah. I've had several people message me and say it's one of the hardest things they've watched with my emotion, because I knew how much I love this business. And people that didn't even know me, as again, like your wife, they just like, oh my God, it brought tears to their eyes. Some said it made them check their own reality. And, when I decided to come back, I went back on Instagram and I deleted it because I never want to see it again. It was the absolute worst time. James, I had gotten to during that time, I was under 200 pounds in weight. It was really bad. And I haven't been under 200 pounds since I was in high school. So it was a bad time, but again, that's all behind me. And you have to go through those things and they always say rock bottom is a college education, but I've started, I look in a different place for my answers now and stop depending on people. And like I said, again, my fiance is my biggest supporter, my biggest cheerleader. And there's nothing more positive than having a woman holding your hand and telling you to go harder. So.
Awesome. Well, you mind if I ask you a couple of career questions?
Man, ask anything you want. I'm open for anything.
All right. So I do my research, and I was watching some interviews that you've done. There's a number of them out there, and some are on our site. We have had you on since that 2002 snafu. But one of the interviews that I saw you do was you talking about your time in the power plant. And you don't have to name drop, but I'm curious. You said 2 WCW higher-ups told you that you were not cosmetically pleasing enough for WCW. But you didn't say who they were. Do you mind if I ask who they were or why they told you that?
James J. Dillon and Paul Orndorff.
Wow.
They told me when I got through wrestling, I was the very last match of them coming to see who they had at the power plant. And, man, they had, the Natural Born Thrillers there, Elix Skipper, Lash LaRue, Mike Sanders, guys like that were wrestling as well. They were under contract. I was not. And I sit there and I got to wrestle one of my good buddies that I traveled up and down the road with. It was literally through him, through Lodi, through Raven and Dreamer that he got a tryout and inevitably got my job at ECW. Anyway, we had a match to where we were doing ECW stuff there. He was doing pullover cross, stuff Kid Cash and I later would end up doing at ECW. He and I were already doing it. And we got done our match. Brad Armstrong come up to me and he said, CW man, Toad, because his wrestling name was Toad. He said, man, that was straight ECW style right there. He said, that was awesome. All the boys were popping, everybody, they were high-fiving us, things like that. And J.J. Dillon and Paul Orndorff walked up to me and told me that, again, I wasn't cosmetically either because then I was 250, 255, that I didn't really have a good look. They were more of a cosmetic company. There wasn't much wrestling. They thought I was an okay wrestler, but their opinion was I would never make any kind of waves or make it in WCW.
Yeah, I actually interviewed Lodi back in the summertime, and he mentioned you, by the way, in passing as well. But I was also talking to Johnny Swinger, and he was talking about how WCW viewed ECW before he went there. And he said that they used to watch and think, oh, there's no way us guys would ever do that kind of stuff. And then little did he know he'd end up in ECW as well.
Yeah.
There's 2 different legacies for ECW. If you listen to modern podcasts, you have the Jim Cornette view of ECW or the Eric Bischoff view of ECW. And then there's those who were like me, watching it at 2 a.m. on Sports Channel America or what have you, through the years and was a hardcore fan of what they did. I find the answer probably lies in the middle, but what do you think of the way ECW is remembered now?
I start off with saying with Jim Cornette, he's somebody that I was a huge fan of, still am. I listen to his podcast every week, listen to snippets of it, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for Jim Cornette and his opinion. Everybody's valued for their opinion. Eric Bischoff, I think I've met him on a couple occasions, don't know him like that. But some people don't like the stuff that we did at ECW, and I get it. It wasn't their forte. They didn't grow up liking it. They were more of an old school wrestling style. And yes, some of our stuff to others didn't make sense, didn't tell good stories. We were, ladders, tables, and chairs. But there was a lot of the hardcore wrestling wasn't so much ladders, tables, and chairs. It was about how we went out there and wrestled our ass off every night, knowing we weren't getting paid, knowing we were backdated checks and money and were owed money. Wrestling with injuries. Like, for instance, one night I had to wrestle Raven, then New Jack in the same match, singles, and my back was out on me. I remember Louis and Bill Wiles carrying me to the gorilla position because my back was out. My music hit, the adrenaline hit. I wrestled. When I got done wrestling Raven, then New Jack came in the back and collapsed, and Roadkill carried me in the back of his van to the airport the next day. So that was the hardcore style that I remember of us wrestling like that. Guys from WCW, guys from WWE, WWF would never have wrestled like that without getting paid. They were spoiled. They were used to being catered and used to making, six figures when I was making $75 a night, paying my own way. So the legacy to me and to fans, it's on how you take it. Most of the fans, 20 some years later, I cannot get in the ring without fans chanting ECW. That's 20 years. Most fans, I won't say most, but a lot, some of them were young, very, very young at the time. Some weren't even born, and you can see them chanting ECW. Thankfully, to the WWE Network, it still airs us. A lot of the older guys, older veterans, probably don't like our style. And hey, I can't knock them. That's their stuff. That's their opinion. But the volume of fans that do, because of how of a cult we were like the Rocky Horror Picture Show of wrestling.
I love that. That's true.
So,
That's true.
And something that powerful, you don't see people chanting WWE. You don't see people chanting the WCW name at shows and stuff like that. But they always chant ECW, because of the hardcore wrestling, the heart and soul we put into it, because everybody that watches the documentaries, and not that BS documentary that WWE put out about
the Rise and Fall.
The Rise and Fall. That was such a BS documentary, because you were seeing it from all the people that WWE took care of. Like, how
Right.
Paul Heyman took care of certain ones, and that's the ones they showed. How about interviewing the guys like myself, Danny Dorn, Chris Chetty, Roadkill, Mikey Whipwreck, the ones that were left behind that had to go elsewhere, that had to go get real jobs. I had to go to Japan to make a living. Some guys just quit, stopped wrestling, about what we had to go through, and the not getting paid, the lies we were told by Paul. One night in Canada, we had our largest house show ever, because I wrestled Rob Van Dam. And we had, I forgot how much money we had to pay everybody. And Paul tells us he can't pay us because it's in Canadian. He sit there and give us this speech. And I still went out, wrestled Rob Van Dam. I don't know if I was main event or not, but Rob Van Dam and I went 45 minutes. I separated my shoulder for the ECW fans. So that's the hardcore, and that's the things. I think the legacy of the hardcore wrestling, and people are not going to agree with me, and that's totally understandable. But in my opinion, and it speaks for itself, when you go to these shows, is that people knew the blood, sweat, and tears we poured into this company when we were getting lied to by Paul Heyman, and still going out there and performing for fans. So
Absolutely. That's why when I hear, and I love Jim Cornette too, I wish he would keep his nose out of politics. But other than that, the thing he says was mass hypnosis. He says Paul used mass hypnosis and that there wasn't that much talent. And I'm thinking, I can name you 10 guys that I would want on my roster today that came from ECW. So I think that's a lot of, as you said, maybe just the old school view.
I've had a few people tell me, one that I know really well, who was one of the longest champs in WWE history and wrestled all the big stuff. He was one of the longest reigning champs in WWE history. He stayed there for many, many years. That's told me on several occasions that I am one of the best people he has ever stepped in the ring with. He's been in the ring with Austin Flair, guys like that. He says, I'm one of the best people he's ever been in the ring with. Dave Hebner told Steve Corino and I, he says, you guys are my favorite tag team to ref. And we're like, oh man, that's cool. Like nowadays, he talking about here in the promotion where he's like, no, ever.
Wow. Awesome.
And,
awesome.
So I know my talent speaks for itself. So yeah, everybody's entitled to a fan. Love Jim Cornette, love his podcast, and if he was to ever hear this and hey, that's his opinion. That's him. I've met Jim a few times and think a lot of him. And again, Midnight Express, Bobby Eaton was and still is today my idol. He was the guy I patterned myself after when I got into wrestling. It wasn't Arn, it was Bobby Eaton, because I wanted to go in there and be able to wrestle Ric Flair or a broomstick and have a 5-star match.
You throw a similar punch to him too. I
actually started mimicking Bobby, and then when I changed it a little bit, that I started working on it at the power plant, and then Sarge saw me started hitting it in matches, and he still says, I remember many years ago we talked, and people still tell me that UCW, you still have the best punch in wrestling, and that's what he used to tell me. You got the best punch in wrestling. because I was punching people 2 and 3 times a night. He said, "You're wasting your talent or wasting that punch. Hit them one time." And I mean, you can go back and look at the ECW footage of me punching people and see fans pop and react to it because it looks so real.
Absolutely, absolutely. You mentioned it already, but the I Quit match was phenomenal. In fact, if you watch that whole pay-per-view, the whole pay-per-view was really good. It didn't feel like a company that was about to pack up. But watching that show back, that ECW I Quit match with Tommy Dreamer, Guilty as Charged 2001, for those who want to find it on the network and watch it, would you say that that was probably the highlight of your career?
Absolutely. That was the match, that I'm most known for. And, whoever watches this and has known this, just know that that night is my 30th birthday. So that's a hell of a way to celebrate your birthday, especially your 30th. And that match meant so much to me because going into it, they were making me to be the next champ at ECW. And you're right, it didn't look like a company that was going under. In fact, matter of fact, we had no idea that was happening. And I still, I never got paid for that I Quit match. Rob Van Dam got like $10,000 or $20,000 of money he was owed to come back and wrestle that night. And he wasn't coming back. That's what I was told from other people. But wrestling Tommy on pay-per-view, being an I Quit match, and we had a few of the other guys there saying, an I Quit is going to be so hard to pull off. Not a lot of people can pull it off because when you think of I Quit, you think of Magnum and Tully. And it really bothers me to the day that my I Quit match and some of those mouths that are talked about is not put in there. Most people say it's Magnum and Tully, me and Tommy. And then you go to the people that are WWE marks and they'll go on with the I Quit matches there. And of course you always throw Ric Flair and Terry Funk in. But Tommy always said that if he said it in our match, he said, I think it's good, I'm going to shake your hand. And him shaking my hand at the end of that match. And then you don't really get to hear it unless you're listening to the audio when they're playing it back, showing the highlights of it. But as I'm walking back, the fans are standing on their feet chanting CF and dub. I'm getting a standing ovation from 3,000 fans because of that match. Yes, the hardest ones to please, I'm getting a CF and dub chant and a standing ovation for that match. And it was really emotional sitting there trying to be heel and walk through the back, looking around at all those fans cheering for me.
Absolutely. I have a weird question that's never been asked, at least as far as I know, but it's about that very night. You guys used a weird ring. It was not your usual ECW blue ring. It was the white mat. It was a different looking setup. Was there a reason for that, or was it just happenstance that it turned out that way?
I think it was happenstance because one of the other weird things about that night was, the finish of that I Quit was, the table wrapping around my eyes. Well, it was supposed to be barbed wire, but when Tommy and them got to the building, so much stuff was missing out of that ring truck, including barbed wire. He said, we don't have any. So that was, I don't know exactly why. A good person to ask, if you ever know, is like Mike Keener. Mike Keener was on the ring crew at that time, so that's something I could possibly ask him. He might know, or I think Bill Wiles may know because one time though he wasn't on the ring crew, he was still the head of those guys.
Awesome. So I bought a VHS tape from our friends at RF Video about 6 months after ECW closed. It was called A Reunion of Stars, and it was supposed to be an ECW reunion. It wasn't officially one. It was kind of just a thrown together one in the New York area.
In Buffalo.
And yeah, Buffalo. And everybody there, you wrestled Tommy again on that one. Everybody there had the same story. It sucked that ECW was gone. And it seemed like there was like such a vibe that you guys were missing something. Mm-hmm. Was it hard losing ECW from your life that abruptly?
I went through an 8-month depression spell afterwards, along with many others did as well. Mine was I worked so hard to make it in this business, and the brass ring was so close to me because, I was signing my contract after my I Quit match. I was getting the television belt at Living Dangerously, and then followed by the world title, and all that being snatched away from you, and you're right back to zero. And everybody has went through that depression spell because it was gone. It was like we were all a family, and seeing, I used to tell my mom, I always go see my mom before I'd leave to head out of town for the weekend. I was like, all right, Mom, I'm going to work. She's like, you're not going to work. You're going to see your second family. And that's what it was. We were so close, and I know you've heard people say this, and if you've ever listened to one of my interviews, we all exchanged Christmas gifts. We were so close. So when it shut down and I didn't get to see these guys every weekend, it was a huge depression. Seeing them that weekend in Buffalo when Tommy ran that show, and every now and then we'll do reunions. A few years ago, that company AML I worked for in North Carolina, we did WrestleCade and brought an ECW night in. We always pick, it seems like no matter whenever we get back together, we pick right back up where we left off. It's another one of these that we haven't seen each other in years. It's back to cracking jokes, making fun of each other, hanging out, just like it used to be. So yeah, losing ECW was that, it's been 20 years. Because tonight actually made the last. It was the Pine Bluff, Arkansas show. I saw where Louis Dangerous later. Yep, it was the last night of ECW. So, yeah, it was definitely a huge blow.
Yep, I have that tape too. For that matter. All right. Well, there was a lot of starts or attempts to restart an ECW type brand, and one of the biggest ones was one you were a part of, which was MLW, and you got to be part of the Extreme Horseman there. It was a really cool faction. The shows, which were aired on Sunshine Network in Florida, really cool shows, very, very ECW heavy feeling show. What did you think of MLW back then, and did you like being part of that Extreme Horseman group?
As far as being part of MLW, loved it. It was another one of the high points in my career, being a part of that, and everybody being there. We all, everybody got along. We were welcoming new people in, but we, knew most of the others. And then being part of the Extreme Horsemen because, Steve Corino and I, along with Dusty Rhodes, give us the gimmick name during his TCW, and it was myself, Steve Corino, and Barry Windham. And everybody knows that knows me and Steve. Steve and I have been best friends for 27 years. And then Simon was really close to us as well, and we wanted to do that at ECW. But Court let us run with it at MLW. He told us, whatever you guys want to do, let's do it. Let's see if it draws. Let's see if it works. And it did work because we were outdrawing whatever ECW. When ECW come to Florida, their house shows, when we came at MLW right afterwards, we were outdrawing the ECW crowds, number-wise. But that was so much fun, being able to wrestle Dusty and Terry Funk and Dr. Dev Steve Williams on a nightly basis. It was so, and then, we have our own control, and of course you're never wrong when you're going down to Florida to hang out. So I loved working with Court Bauer and all those guys.
All right. What do you think of MLW now?
What I've seen of it, I've liked. Again, you got Low Key, Tom Lawler, a few of those guys there that I know, and from what I've seen their shows, and it's a newer style, but what I've seen of them, the shows, the matches, all have been very, very interesting. Because I've talked to Court a few times, maybe about coming down there, and if something ever was to open up, I'd love to get down there and work again for him.
All right, so Harry Slash was a guest of mine during the old ECW on WWE's version, WWE ECW, if you will. And it was actually on in the background when I was interviewing. And I said, "Aren't you watching? There's ECW on." He said, "No, ECW died in 2001. There's a show called ECW on now." And he was pretty, blunt about it. You were part of that. Just didn't have the same vibe for me. I didn't get into it. What did you think of WWE's attempt to recreate the magic of ECW?
It sucked. It was it was a Disney version of ECW, and if Vince would have kept his hands out of it, it would have done well. Because the only reason I signed is the day Tommy called me. He said that Tommy said that Paul and I have complete control of ECW. It's going to be completely like it used to be. We're going to run little towns, little shows, just like we used to. You're going to be one of my top heels again. We're going to pick right back up where we left off. And the very first night at the ECW arena, after Vince saw it, he didn't like what it looked like on TV, and he took control of it, and he started implementing his own people in there, and it just wasn't ECW. Not at all. And once that happened, I couldn't get out of there fast enough. I was actually excited the day I got fired. I got one TV match with CM Punk, which was fine. I've always liked wrestling with Punk. And come to find out later, they were getting ready to push me. I know Paul told me they were getting ready to do something with me. And then I wrestled Kevin Thorne in Oklahoma City and blew out my L5 and S1 again. And I was done. I was done. You know, there were some shows, there were some tours or loops I was left off of. It was like I was every other week. And, you know, I would be, for was it like a Saturday night, I'd be hanging out here or hanging out at home or going to a local show, hanging out, and WWE would call me, we need you on a plane tomorrow morning to get back on the road. I'm like, what the hell? But that whole version of it sucked. When you started implementing WWE guys and he had control because he wouldn't let Paul and Tommy do what they wanted to, and then them changing my name to that stupid Christopher W. Anderson because he said, you know, I don't want people to think you work for the CW network. Well, if I'm not mistaken, who do you think the CW, they got the idea from? The very first time in TV Guide that the two actors promoted the CW network, they're doing my CW sign. So what does that tell you? And then he said, well, we've got to change your name from CW because people think you know, CM Punk, CW, that's too close. Well, I get it. You know, I was a little heavier then. Punk was slim, had hair. I was bald. He wore trunks. I wore a singlet. I guess where they can get to see us at Twins. It was very stupid.
Absolutely. And you mentioned Paul a few times during this interview, and there was the public social media bickering between you two. I don't know how many years ago, maybe 5 years ago or so. Have you guys ever, you know, talked it out, hugged it out, or is there still bad feelings there?
I haven't talked to him since. Not when Tommy was trying to be the mediator between, because Tommy was like, oh, what the hell are you doing? You know, you're calling CW a low-level stooge. Who did I have the stooge off to? You were paying me $75 a night, but yet I was your flavor of the month. When I came in there, I couldn't do no wrong. And I guess he didn't tell on Twitter when he got on his hands and knees and begged me not to go to WCW after my Massacre on 34th Street match. I guess he wasn't going to tell people that because he had heard rumors that I was going to WCW and begged me not to go. You know, I wasn't going to because I'm loyal to whoever hires me. And I love ECW and I would have stayed. And then he got pissed off because I said he was out there filming the movie Rollerball when he was supposed to be out there saving us, when he was lying to us and telling us he was out there for the USA Network. But it's funny, I did an interview with 3 or 4 ECW guys, and one of them being New Jack, and New Jack tells a story who he's never heard that interview with me before, or me posting that, and he starts telling the same story. Of course, Paul didn't say anything to New Jack then because he knew New Jack would kill him. But Paul just felt like he could pick on me because I wasn't New Jack. And what people fail to realize, because they were kiss asses and kissing Paul's ass at the same time. Because when I come back with my story, nobody said a word. It's like crickets. You know, the people were trolls anyway, taking Paul's side because they don't know the true story. Well, that's what was told to me from higher ups. You know, I didn't make that shit up. People from higher up in ECW came to me and came to us and said, Paul's out there filming the movie Rollerball. He's not trying to save us. So, I haven't tried to make up with him, have no desire to make up with him. I'm thankful he gave me my job. He's the one that saw something in me, and I appreciate that. But don't go on Twitter and be a tough guy and shit like that.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. We talked a little bit about modern wrestling, and you did appear on a recent show about a year ago. In fact, that's almost a year ago too, which was NWA Power, and I loved it. I love what they brought. I mean, I grew up. I'm 40 years old. I'm going to be 40 in September. So I grew up at the late 80s, early 90s wrestling, which was still a little bit of that studio environment. What did you think of NWA Power? And if they ever get going again, would that be somewhere where you might plant your feet?
I absolutely loved working with NWA Power and being there. You know, I knew Billy Corgan from ECW and reached out to him, and he brought me in and did a few things with me. Had some really good success there, and had some really good matches. Loved everybody there. I knew most everybody there, and it's the closest thing to the ECW locker room that I've gotten in a long time. And everybody there was to help everybody. You had agents like Homicide, Trevor Murdoch, Simon Diamond, Crimson, guys like that who I think the world of, and they were agents plus wrestling, and still willing to help everybody else. and that's the stuff in wrestling I like. When you're out there and you're wrestling and you come back and you're still willing to help other people and get them better, that's what I love about this business. Now, if Billy decided to bring it back and do something else with it, I would want to be one of the first ones there. I actually enjoyed working for Billy and Dave Lagana and all those guys. And again, I grew up like you. I grew up in Raleigh, so the NWA holds a place in my heart. And being an Anderson and being at the NWA with that studio style, man, it's like a perfect fit for me. And it was good. It was good to see when I walked out the very first night. I wasn't announced. I wasn't, nobody knew I was going to be there. And when I walked out, and you could hear people go, "Holy hell, CW Anderson!" And I got a huge ECW reaction from fans. So it was good that I was still remembered to some extent, because there's nothing worse than walking through the curtain and they're like, "Who the heck is this?"
So when you are an independent wrestler and COVID hits, it's got to really suck. I mean, I know that you guys really took a beating. Lodi talked about losing umpteen amount of bookings because of it, and probably more so since then as well. What was it like for COVID to hit, and how do you think wrestling recovers from it when we're able to go outside again?
You're 100% right. It did suck. It canceled everything, and there was nothing to look forward to. I know for me, what keeps me going is the weekend shows, because even up till it hit, there was times that I had worked almost like every weekend for 6 months. I was going like that, sometimes 2-3 times a weekend, and then it all suddenly to go to nothing. And then the personal stuff in my life that hit around the same time, man, it was in a black hole. So I see a lot of guys still doing something in front of no crowd or 10 fans, things like that, just to do something. It's when it's going to recover, who knows? It depends on this vaccine and how they're going to open up the country, and when this new president takes over, and if that ever happens, there's no telling when this country is going to open back up again, because people have lost their freaking minds. Last weekend before last, this is right before Christmas, I was in Virginia with my fiance where she lives, and we're walking my Rottweilers, and this woman, well, she's a young girl, she's probably in her 20s. She walks up along a boardwalk and starts freaking out and jumps in the weeds about 20 feet from us. And I said, "Ma'am, they're not tigers, they're Rottweilers. They're not going to hurt you. They're very low." She's like, "I'm more worried that you don't have a mask on." I said, "Oh my God." I said, "You an idiot." I said, "We're out on the beach." I said, "You got a mask on? It's protecting you." More people are worried about you not wearing a mask and them wearing a mask. And look, you're wearing this little ass blue mask that you paid 30 cents for. You're going to catch. I know people that have completely abided by everything the CDC and I have all said, and they still catch it. So yeah, but when it comes to that, people are losing their freaking mind over wearing this mask and not touching people, and you see the ones in a car wearing it, and it's you got way more problems than just that if you're wearing a mask in your car. So it depends on when this country is going to recover with the vaccine, if it is. And it might be, some people saying it might be another year, at least by the summer.
I know a lot of. I'm a big music fan. A lot of the bands I like, they say, "Oh, no tours in 2021. We'll see you in 2022." And I'm like, really? A whole new year? That's just, I can't imagine that.
My girlfriend's the same. My fiance is the same way. She loves going to concerts and stuff like that, and she's bummed out that she's not going to be able to go. The movie theaters is the same way. You going there. I miss doing that stuff too. As much as I hate movie theaters, just to get out and actually do something.
Do something, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
I'm tired of going to Walmart every day just to walk around.
Exactly right. Yeah, I'm with you on that. So a couple more questions, and we'll let you go. I appreciate you taking this much time with me.
It's fine, man.
You mentioned your fiance. I've watched you do an interview in 2018. You talked about your wife at the time sucking the life out of you. You said that you were in a bad place. It must be a lot nicer having a promising fiance. And by the way, congratulations on air for your fiance.
Thank
and all
you.
that. What does the love of a good woman do for you?
it's kind of stupid. It's, maybe sometimes it makes you feel like you can fly. There was that song that said the sun, sunshine, you can take a break. I forgot the singer that sings it, but it's almost, it's amazing coming from somebody who doesn't support you, who doesn't want you to do this, and want to somebody that supports every decision that you make when it comes to this business. And, she loves wrestling just as much as I do. I've never had so much in common with one woman. We're both gamers. We both work out. We both love wrestling. She's big into Rottweilers, and of course, I got my two. She loves them just like they're her own. It's the love of a good woman can make you do and some amazing things and take you. She took me out of those dark places because it was stuff. When people said, "Man, I'd never kill myself. I'd never do this," you don't know until you get there. And having her, and since we both turned our life over to God, she pushes me to be more of a God-fearing person, because she's doing 2 hours Bible studies a day, things like that. She prepared for me, and again, for people that are not Christians and are not into God, but for me, this is for me telling you. For Christmas, she gave me a notebook that she had been working on every day for a few months, of writing Bible verses, writing her own prayers. If you have anxiety, read this. If you have depression, read this. And she did that stuff and bought a new Bible, bookmarked it for me, highlighted special verses, and that was part of my Christmas present. That's the type of love that she has and what a woman can do for you.
Awesome, man. Well, final question for you. It's not really like anything to lead off of, but I'm just kind of looking at the time, and I'm thinking, ooh, AEW starts in about 45 minutes. So I guess my question was going to be, what do you think of the new brand of wrestling, the hybrid wrestling that is kind of formed, and many people tie it back to ECW because what you guys did was ahead of its time. What do you think of the more acrobatic, crazy style of wrestling that is so featured on All Elite Wrestling?
I'm not that big a fan of it. I'm still an old school. I've wrestled guys like that, make them wrestle my style and throw their stuff. I mean, somebody like Kid Cash was ahead of his time, and I would mix his stuff in with my style and make it work. You can't wrestle that style without having some kind of psychology, some kind of story. It just doesn't. Something just doesn't work. You can watch that stuff on WWE. The stuff just doesn't work. It's not, and I get it. It's hard wrestling in front of the boys and not wrestling in front of fans. But for anybody that loves professional wrestling, I urge you to go and Google CW Anderson AML Wrestling. They call it the second greatest story ever told. It was a 4-match series between myself and George South from 2019, to where the only move and it has every interview, every promo we did. In that, it's about 4 hours long. The matches are about 20 minutes long each, so it's 4 matches. We did not do one match out of the 80s. One move out of the 80s, and it culminated with an I Quit match with Shane Douglas being the referee. These matches told stories. These matches had psychology, and no matter how wrestling evolves, if you don't have psychology, the matches don't make sense. And I'm not one of these old fuddy-duddies and things like that, because guys that are acrobatic, those guys on AEW, some of the guys at WWE, all over, I wish I had that kind of athleticism. I do. And more power to them. But you go watch the matches with George South and myself, look at the story it's told. The second match we did, I'll leave it with this. The promoter said, "I've cried once in professional wrestling." He said, "I watched that match." He said, "I was there tonight, you and George South, when you wrestled. It was my second match on this video." He said, "I cried twice." He said, "The emotions you had the fans," and he said it gave everybody chills. He said it made them feel like they were watching a Rocky movie. And all 4 of those matches were called in the ring. Not one spot was called in the back.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. I have seen a lot of I'm going to sound like a liar now, but I have.
AML, yeah.
I have watched quite a few of their shows that I've seen on YouTube, and it is wrestling the way it should be. So I agree with you completely.
Mm-hmm.
When I watch AEW and I see in the first match they're doing the same moves that they do in the last match, I kind of think, well, I kind of already seen it. So
yeah, exactly. The matches in wrestling, if you have 6 matches in a show, they all have to tell a story, because if the first match does everything, what does it leave for the main event to do?
That's true.
All
right, man. Well, I've taken so much of your time. I really want to thank you for taking this much time with me. Before I let you go, can I just ask for one last favor from you?
Sure.
Can I ask for a station ID, just saying this is CW Anderson, and you're listening to the Wrestling Epicenter?
Yep. Just let me know when you're ready.
All right, we'll do the Wayne's World countdown in 5, 4, 3, 2.
This is ECW Original, the enforcer, CW Anderson, and you're listening to the Wrestling Epicenter. And I listen to it because I'm an Anderson.
That's perfect, man. Thank you so much. You know what else you are, by the way? You are the only guy who's ever sworn at me in Japanese. I asked you to swear at me in Japanese during one of our last interviews, so there you go.
Now we got that.
All right. Well, I appreciate your time. I hope that wasn't too long.
No, man, dude, I was here for you tonight, man. It's all about getting this show in.
The preceding announcement was paid for by the Wrestling Epicenter.
On to listen, and if you like what you heard, I'm glad. If you didn't like what you heard, well, go fuck yourself.
Most people don't hung up on me.
We had a lovely conversation.
What a show.
Oh, mercy, Daddy.
On the radio dial. Don't hang up. Bye-bye.